So I'm on the path to beating 1,000 video games in my lifetime, and these are the rules I'm abiding by on my journey so people know what counts and what doesn't. Rule number 1, it has to have a story mode or campaign. Multiplayer-only titles like Apex Legends or Fortnite don't make the cut, no matter how many hours I put into them. Additionally, games that tell their story through the playing of multiplayer like the original Titanfall or have lore hidden throughout by playing multiplayer like Hunt Showdown also don't make the list. Older titles like Street Fighter 2 or Mortal Kombat that don't have a story mode per se but do have that tower thing you fight your way to the top of make the list as long as they aren't replacing the actual story mode. And arcade games that just kinda end after you get so far like 720 will count, but endless games won't unless for example you reach the kill screen on Pac-Man, because that's an achievement all on its own. Rule number 2. I have to have started the game from the beginning and made it to the end. Games that I poured hours into but just couldn't pull the trigger on the final boss like Enchanted Arms or Sekiro, unfortunately don't count. Older games that got rented from Blockbuster like Resident Evil 2 or games borrowed from friends with saves at the end like Pokemon Blue also won't count. Games with Easter egg joke endings like Far Cry 4 where if you just don't get up from the table and the game ends, again, don't count. However, games with optional endings at the end of the game, such as Bloodborne, do count. Rule number 3, any version of the game counts as long as it's the full original version. For example, Uncharted 4 Thief's End features a Crash Bandicoot section. That doesn't mean I beat Crash Bandicoot. And games like Ninja Gaiden that have been released multiple times and people argue that version B is easier or harder than version A, it doesn't matter. Finish any version and it counts. Lastly, rule number 4, each game only gets one entry on this list. If I added up all the playthroughs I've done through Mass Effect 1 and Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, I would end up with 16 playthroughs, but each game only gets 1 credit. And again, games that have been released multiple times or have multiple editions like the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, that have been released like 19 times across various platforms, also only count as 1, no matter how many of the different versions I've played. There is a caveat to this rule though, because occasionally games don't just get remastered like The Last of Us to the remaster, they get remade like Final Fantasy VII to the Final Fantasy VII Remake. This is going to be taken into consideration on a case-by-case basis, because even though the plot, characters, and setting are the same, the experience is largely different. Now when I'm reviewing these games, I'm going to be going largely from memory, because anyone can just Google a synopsis of 1,000 games, but this list is the real deal. I'm going to do my best to stick to the rules, but some games might fall into a category I haven't thought of at the moment. So come along with me on the journey to 1,000 games, and be sure to comment your favorite games, or any games you're surprised haven't made the list. Named after the ultimate trick at the time, 720 is a skateboarding game released by Atari Games in 1986. I, however, didn't play it until 1999 when it released on Game Boy Color. From what I remember, you play as a skater that would do tricks around the neighborhood, and if you got enough points, you could enter a skate competition located somewhere on the map. After beating like 4 competitions, it would take you to the next map, and if you completed, I think, 4 maps, the game would end. And any money that you had accrued would turn into points. If you didn't earn enough points to enter a skate competition before a countdown ended, you would hear... And I remember something would chase you down and kill you. And I actually had to look that part up. Yeah, it turns out that it was like a floating pair of scissors, at least on the Game Boy anyway. Anyway, that's ridiculous. I don't remember the game being that great at the time that I played it, but it was a fun time killer. Would I recommend it to someone? No. But was it terrible? Also no. So I think I'm going to give this game 5 out of 10. And that makes this game the first stone on the road to 1,000 games. Ugh, this game was hard. I had a hint button and it was still difficult. The Secret of Monkey Island features the real MVP, Stan S. Stanman, but unfortunately, the game isn't about him.
I think we're having a real moment here.
Instead, we're treated to Guybrush Threepwood. In this game, he isn't well known and hasn't really accomplished anything, but he remains determined to become a mighty pirate. This game came out in 1990, but I wouldn't play it until the special edition released in 2009 on the Xbox 360 arcade. My introduction to the series was actually Escape from Monkey Island, which was also a lot of fun. The writing was great, the humor was great, the characters were great, just good luck solving the puzzles without assistance because it wasn't about logic or how smart you were. It's about being able to decode what seemed to be a long series of inside jokes from the developers at Lucasfilm Games. This game was definitely worthy of its success and the spawning of a franchise, so this game gets an 8 out of 10, and becomes the second stone on the path to 1,000 games. Diablo and his minions are really harshing my vibe. Traveler, Put them in these stones and we'll crush them up like we're at a party in the 80s. As I sat down to write this review, an epiphany I'd had prior really cemented itself in. In perhaps the most controversial addition to the road to 1,000 games for the near future, I felt the need to go into a little more detail about how I feel about Diablo 2 and why I'm giving it the score I did. Setting the scene, it's 2023 and I was speaking with a coworker about Diablo 4's upcoming release. We were both excited about it. Telling stories back and forth about how we got into Diablo, I personally have a memory of playing Diablo 1 when I was young with my dad and brother. I didn't play Diablo 2 for a long time after it came out, until after I purchased the battle chest somewhere around 2007. As I'm talking to my coworker, I said the thing I've said many times. Diablo 2 is a classic, it's awesome. You just have to get past the first level because the story hasn't picked up, the level design is a little more drab and boring, you aren't high level, etc. And not trying to take over the whole conversation, that's where I always naturally stop. And it's where I've stopped many times before when having discussions with friends and fans of the series I've met throughout my life. After this latest talk, I thought about it for a while and realized, well, I guess I should have said the game is fun after the first and second level, because the desert is a slow burn that goes on forever. The set pieces of the story are still being built, and it kinda just overstays its welcome. Surely, the game gets good after this.
And what do you know of suffering?
Bitch, please. No! It's the swamp level, or jungle, or whatever you want to call it, and that level is just terrible. The aesthetic, somehow it manages to be overly confusing in a game that runs on procedural generation. The enemies, everything is terrible at this point. And then there's hell, when the game finally really does get good. The climax of the story is reaching full swing, the setting is dire, the weight of what happens next can be felt, culminating in the fight against Diablo. The Lord of Destruction expansion was a great addition to the game as well, and I leave the game feeling satisfied over my victory and wanting more. But why? As I explained, I didn't like 75% of the game. Anyway, I have a theory as to why this is the case, but let me know in the comments if anyone cares about my theories. So for right now, this ramble has gone on long enough, so I say all that to say the game's okay. And I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Honestly, by talking about Diablo 2, I've also said all I need to say about Diablo 3. The only difference being the game got good in Act 3 in Diablo 3 instead of Act 4, but everything else still stands. I will acknowledge there were some differences, but not enough to make a whole other video about it. So that makes Diablo 2 and Diablo 3 the third and fourth stones on the road to 1,000 games. For the fans of the road to 1,000 games so far, please forgive me for this low effort video. It's really more of an addition that I should have added onto the end of a different video. Basically, I'm making this to say that I realized after the Diablo 2 entry that there wasn't going to be much more I could say about later games in the Monkey Island franchise that I didn't already say in the Secret of Monkey Island video. So for posterity, I'm posting this so we don't miss any steps, but Monkey Island 2, LeChuck's Revenge, and Escape from Monkey Island do lose originality points for being sequels that don't really shake up the original formula in a memorable way, but they were still fun, so they do both get 7 out of 10s, making these the 5th and 6th stones on the road to 1,000 games. And finally, Tales of Monkey Island, where I felt the same way about the characters, setting, etc., but I realized through the episodic adventure that I wasn't looking forward to more. I started it, so I finished it, but I think I've had my fill of Monkey Island and its insane logic, so that game gets a 6 out of 10. Still an okay game, but after playing the previous entries, I've had enough, making this the 7th stone on the road to 1,000 games.
Since the dawn of time, the armies of heaven and hell have waged an endless war.
Darksiders was fantastic when it came out. The characters, lore, setting, everything was outstanding. From memory, you play as one of the 4 horsemen, War. War gets summoned to Earth prior to the 7 seals being broken, which is supposed to be the signal for Armageddon to commence. But the angels and demons have started the war earlier than planned. War gets framed for being the cause of Armageddon because him going to Earth early was a bad thing, and gets his powers stripped from him by the Charred Council, and he's imprisoned for 100 years. When he's finally freed, we find out that humanity didn't survive the war, and the Charred Council tasked War with investigating why the war happened before the seal was broken. I remember the gameplay being very reminiscent of Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time with its items and the way the game progresses. Again, on the road to 1,000 games, I'm going from memory, so some of the fine details might be wrong, but either way, this game is going to be the first 10 out of 10 game on this list, and the 8th stone on the road to 1,000 games. Rusty Lake is a series of puzzle games which I mostly played on mobile with the exception of The White Door. Now the games tend to be short enough on their own that I would be hesitant to make them count for this list, but considering I've been a fan of what the developers at Rusty Lake are doing, with their creepy atmosphere, thought-provoking story, and disjointed timeline, I'm making the executive decision to count the series, but only as one entry. I love the way the story in these games are told, where it's a community effort to try and piece together the events to tell a cohesive narrative, very much like how From Software tells their stories in their games. Anyway, the gameplay usually takes place in a series of locations with an escape room-esque objective, find objects in the room to help you solve puzzles located in the other parts of the room until the chapter's end. A lot of the series is available for free in the App Store if you want to see firsthand what I'm talking about. It's been a while since a new release, so I'm unsure if the story is still continuing, but either way, I'm rating the Rusty Lake series an 8 out of 10, making Rusty Lake the 9th stone on the road to 1,000 games. Game of the Year 2024, Astro Bot is a platformer centered around all things PlayStation. The game begins with the Astro Bots traveling through space when suddenly a giant alien picks apart their ship and scatters the Astro Bots across the stars. Your mission? Travel to all the different worlds, reunite the Astro Bots, and reassemble the spaceship before taking on the alien. Occasionally, you'll get to visit a themed world that centers around a specific PlayStation title like God of War, Uncharted, or Horizon. This game was great, and well deserving of the hype it received. That being said, while it's the best platformer I've played in a long time, I couldn't say it's the best of all time since it's missing things I personally miss from the yesteryear of gaming. Many of the bots represent characters from various titles over the decades like Resident Evil, Ape Escape, Street Fighter, Spider-Man, Sly Cooper, etc. None of them are uniquely important or memorable like the characters you would find in Banjo-Kazooie, and needing to select the levels doesn't feel the same as an interconnected world where you find the levels. So I'm giving this game a 9 out of 10 as it was absolutely fantastic and making this game the 10th stone on the road to 1,000 games.